I am, as I was just introduced, my name is Becky. I'm a singer educator. We have in the chat, when you have questions to be answered, Bethany and Sani, they're going to answer whatever questions you have, maybe throw a few to me. So, ask your questions away. If you were not aware, there is a PDF on the Michaels site of what we're going to do today, what we're going to cover. You can print this out, and part one of the project is all here. Part 2 and 3 will be loaded to the Michaels site for the next 2 dates, February 29th, and then one near the end of March. I wanted to draw your attention to the project supply list here. I did that when you download this and print this, I did indicate the items that you don't need until part 2 or 3 so that you can budget if you need to go out and do some shopping for this project. So what we're going to do is in part 1, we're going to start making the top of a quilt. There's 3 pieces to a quilt. There's the top that we piece. So as my husband would say, so you cut fabric up and then you sew it back together again. Exactly. But we're going to start the piecing. We will finish it in part 2. We're going to make a basic 9 patch today. Looks like this. But then we're going to cut that apart, toss it around, and make the pattern that is in the quilt right behind me. In order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is talk about fabric selection. So I'm going to switch my camera over to my cutting area, and we can talk about why I picked the colors I picked. I have to walk around the table to get there. So here I am. Now, when I was planning this quilt, it was November timeframe. Up here in the Northeast, I'm in Connecticut, and that's when most of the leaves have fallen off the trees and it starts to get gray, kind of dreary looking. So my mind turned to spring colors. I wanted some happy spring colors that would make me smile and make me think of sunnier days. So I went into the fabric store, my favorite quilt shop, and I walked around, and what caught my eye was this red fabric. And that is generally how I start to plan a quilt. I will go into the store. I might have a color plan in mind, or I might not. And I walk around and I see what catches my eye. Well, I love red, I love pink, and I love tulips. So this fabric caught my eye because it just made me happy. It made me smile when I looked at it. The other thing that was nice about this fabric is it's not directional. So I can have it this way, turn it around, and really I can even do it sideways. I don't have to worry about what's up, what's down on my fabric, which makes it a little easier for cutting. So I honed in on this and said, well, what matches it? A lot of times when you go into a store and you go to the quilting fabrics, you're looking for good quality quilting cotton. And they will cluster a manufacturer's line around its colors. So these fabrics are actually from the same manufacturer, the same line. So they had greens and the reds, pick up the reds in there. They had this lovely yellow, and the little red flowers matched my colors in my red. And then I brought in blue. So I really was going at primary colors, and then I threw in some yellow to just give it a little bit of a pop. Yellow makes me happy. When you are planning a 9-patch quilt or a tossed 9-patch, which is what we're doing, You can be very purposeful, like I did with the fabrics, or you can use your scraps. You could, us sewers, we all have scrap fabric. You could decide to just take fabrics you have and use them to make the 9-patch. And those turn out wonderfully. They're scrappy looking quilts, but they have a hominess to it that is warm looking. So you don't have to go buy fabrics. You could use the cottons you have at home. I picked out these 4 small prints, knowing that if I was going to, in this particular project, it's a 5-inch square. So I'm going to put it on the red because it shows the best. So when we're going to be cutting 5-inch squares, you want to take a look at that print under there. Here's 5-inch. I'm trying to get away from that light bulb. You want to make sure that your pattern shows up inside there. If you pick a really big pattern, something that has big flowers, you might have to, if you really want to use that big pattern, you might have to do what they call fussy cut, which is where you find the pattern you want and you cut around it. But when you pick small prints, you don't have to worry about that. Your design's going to show no matter where it's at. So I picked those 4, and then I knew I needed, for the center of my block, a dark color that would pull everything together. So I went for the dark blue as my center. And then I used a white on white background. Now, when you do a scrappy quilt, a lot of times people who are making these scrappy 9 patches, instead of one background color, they will pick 2, 3, 4 different fabrics. And so all their blocks will be different. That works out really well too. I wanted to keep it simple. So I have 4 small prints, a center block color, and then my background color. Now, when you buy a fabric, and you bring it home, I'll show, here's one I brought home. You're going to bring it home. It's going to have crease marks. See all these crease marks? We need to iron out those crease marks. I have seen people, and I've been guilty of it on occasion, who will just start cutting with the crease marks in, going, it's all right, I can stretch it out. Don't do that. Before you ever start sewing, fabric preparation is so important in order to get a good quality quilt at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about ironing and pressing. Before I do that, let's, in the instructions for the quilt, it says for your 4 small prints and your center, my blue center, you need fat quarters. Well, what's a fat quarter? This is a fat quarter, this blue piece. So fat quarters have a, it's a 1/4 yard of fabric, 1/4 of a yard, but it is not cut in the traditional way. Quilters often use fat quarters instead of a regular 1/4 yard fabric. So I drew this out this morning just to try to show it. A fat quarter is 18 inches by 21 inches. So if I'm cutting 5-inch squares out of this, I can get 12 5-inch squares and still have fabric left over for some smaller cuts that I might be doing. If I go into a store and I buy a 1/4 of a yard, 1/4 of a yard, and have them cut it the normal way, you end up with a piece that's 9 inches by 42, 44 inches, depends on the manufacturer. You're only going to be able to get maybe 8 5-inch blocks out of this, and then you're going to have a 4-inch strip left. So fat quarters are an efficient way to buy 1/4 of a yard and get more pieces out of it than a regular 1/4 yard. And so when you go into a quilt store and you ask for a fat quarter, they know what you're talking about.
So, Becky, before I love that about the fat quarters, before you actually go on, we did have a question about washing the fabric as well as ironing. So,
Yes.
if you would address that, that would be great.
Yes, to wash or not. The great debate. Uh, there are people who wash everything before they use the fabric. There are others who never wash. I'm in between. And the reason I'm in between is because I had a quilt bleed on me once. So it was a red and white quilt, and the red bled. It wasn't not all my red fabrics bled. The fabrics, I had some very good quality cotton red quilter's cotton fabric in the quilt that did not bleed, but I ran short. So I grabbed some red from some fabric that someone had given me. And it turns out it was not a good quality cotton, and it is the fabric that bled on the quilt. So when I am making a quilt and I have deep blues like this, if I have really rich reds, purples, anything with a lot of dye in it, um, I will do a test soak. So I will cut a piece off. I will put it in a bowl of hot water because I really want to test it with my detergent. And I will put it in there and soak it. And I'll look at the water. If the water picks up the blue or the red, I can see dye in there. I need to pre-wash that. It also depends the store I buy my fabrics in. So most of the time, if I go in and buy to my local quilt store and buy my good quality quilter's cotton, I feel pretty safe that the colors are not going to bleed and that the shrinkage will be minimal. When I am quilting a quilt, I do wash, they sell something called wide backs. So they're like 108 inches wide so that you have one piece of fabric. If you're making a big quilt, king size, queen size, even a double bed, and you use a wide back, I always wash those because I've just found they shrink a little more than I like. So it's a personal preference whether you wash or not. If you're worried, go ahead and wash all your fabrics. You know, and you don't have to throw them in the washer. You can wash them in the kitchen sink, and you can, um, throw them in the dryer and dry them. The other thing you can do to prevent color bleed is, and I give this when I gift a quilt. I'm going to switch cameras here over to my iron. When I gift a quilt, I pick up a box of color catchers. And what color catchers do is they catch the dye that goes into the wash water. And so you don't get the bleeding onto your quilt. The dye is picked up in the water. When you pull these, they look like dryer sheets, but they're color catchers. They catch the dye, and when you pull them out of the washer, you can see the dye in them. So a couple of different ways you can approach it. All right, so I'm under this camera. I wanted to talk about grain. When you are getting ready to cut your fabric, when you're dealing with a fat quarter, it's a lot easier because it's a small piece of fabric. But the background fabric, you're going to use 3/4 of a yard. So that's a little bigger piece of fabric. And you want to make sure you are cutting on the grain. So what's a grain? This yellow fabric, I think it'll show best. If I pull, I'm going to pull this way. It pulls stiff because the grain, the direction the fibers are going is up and down. And if this is up and down, that means they're also going perpendicular to it, left to right. And if I pull, it's stiff. So my grain is here or here. If I pull on the diagonal, see how stretchy that pulls? That's the bias. Now, when you are doing clothes making or a specific type of quilt binding, sometimes you're told to cut on the bias. But we don't, when we're piecing a quilt, you want to cut on the grain. So you always want to find your grain. And I will do this. I can take a big piece of fabric and I just kind of hang it down in the direction of the grain to let it relax into place and fold it. And that's where I'm going to start when I do my cutting. But before I cut, we'll go back to the iron. We have to iron this. And so I'm going to show you, because this one's got lots of fold lines in it. When you iron clothes, people do this. They iron back and forth. When you are prepping your fabrics for a quilt, it's okay to iron back and forth like this. You should use a good mister. I just sprayed a lightweight starch. You want to starch all your fabrics. Once it's starched, you can do that kind of hang fold that I just demonstrated. Ironing is okay. Once you cut and start to sew these back together, we don't make this back and forth motion. We just press, because ironing will stretch fabrics, pressing will not. So I iron my fabrics to get the wrinkles out. I fold them on the grain, but then when I am wanting to iron my fabrics after I've sewn them, I'm not going to move my iron back and forth. I'm just going to press in place. And that's really, really important. Okay, so let's assume we've prepped our fabrics, they're starched. And now we need to talk about how to cut for this quilt. Before we cut, what do you need to cut?
Becky,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There a couple people, I don't know if there's a way. This camera does seem just a little bit blurry. I don't know if we can, if there's a way to make it. Yeah, this one right here.
Uh,
There may not be. I'm sorry, guys, that if it's a little blurry, but sometimes that happens with the way the cameras are set.
it's um, it's the camera. I could.
That's okay. I
Is
think we're going to I think it's okay. And someone asked about titanium quilting needles.
titanium quilting? Love them. What did they ask about him?
They just asked if you need them or if you just love them.
You know, I use them, but I use them depends on the work I'm doing. The I'm just that's these are this I am using the titanium universal needles here that Singer sells under the blurry camera. And I love them. I use them on all my machines. I just and I don't have any issues with them. They just give a nice smooth up and down. So I've also recently discovered titanium rotary blades, which I also like. I think they're a little tougher, a little more robust. So can how blurry is this? I can always switch my cutting board to my ironing station. How blurry is that? Can we, is it okay, Sonny, or?
I think it's okay, Becky, because we're just cutting, but when you show anything detailed, I would go over to the ironing camera.
Yeah, I'll use a different camera.
Yeah, totally fine. Thank you.
So the first time I took a quilting class, I had to go buy a few things. So where do you start? Well, you need a good rotary cutter and you need a quilter's ruler. If you can only buy one ruler, I suggest you buy, this is a 6-inch by 24-inch. So this one will take care of most of the measurements you need to do when you're piecing. If you can get a second one, then I would recommend a 6x6. I own lots and lots of rulers. It's a little bit of an addiction. But I use these the most. And after that would be a 2.5 inch wide one that I use, 2.5 by 18. The other thing that you need is a rotary cutter. There are lots and lots of different kinds of rotary cutters. My new favorite is this one because it's got a safety lock. So this is a 60mm rotary cutter. You don't typically use a 60mm when you're cutting to piece. I use the 60mm when I'm squaring off the completed quilt. But I wanted to show you this one because the way you open and expose the blade is to just pull back this black lever. So this blade out here, this is a really sharp blade. I'm not going to touch because it'll cut my finger. The problem with a construction like this is you have to be real careful. When you sit it down, you've got to close it. Why? Because even though you think you know where it is, you get busy working and you'll hit the edge of that blade and you will cut yourself. I have small grandchildren who like to play hide and seek in my sewing area. And the last thing I want is for the 2.5-year-old to pick up one of these. So this one's usually put away. This one has a lock mechanism. So when this red button is pushed up, I can't push on this lever at all to open it. So I can lock it in place. I can unlock it. The blade is still protected by the plastic around it until I hold the lever down. If I let go, the blade retracts. So it's got a nice safety feature. It's a 45mm, which is my blade size of preference and what most quilters use when they're going to go cutting. There's also types like this. I use this one when I'm doing a lot of cutting because it takes the strain off my wrist. So I'm going to use this one today and going to talk about what's the best way to use a rotary cutter and not cut your finger. I have cut my finger lots and lots of times, folks. I don't want you to because fingers bleed a lot and they take a long time to heal. So when you start with your piece of fabric, you need a clean, straight edge. So I've folded this on the grain. There's just the one piece of fabric folded in half. Don't stack your fabrics. You get more inaccurate cuts when you do that. So I put my ruler down and I have to move this up so you can see the bottom. There it is. So I'm going to line up one of the lines on my ruler with my straight edge down here. And I'm going to make sure at the top of the ruler, I also have a line up there so that I know that this edge is straight. So it's squaring off of the ruler. And then I'm going to take my blade and this is the right-handed way to cut. I'm right-handed. I have my left hand on the ruler like a crab, and I'm going to end up crab walking up my ruler. But I put it down like this. I am standing. I am not sitting. If physically you're not able to stand, then certainly you're going to cut sitting down. But when you're standing, you get more accurate cuts because you can be right over your fabric. So I don't start going forward. I actually come in about a 1/2 inch into the fabric and I roll back just a little, like a 1/2 inch. Then I roll forward and I cut all the way down. If your blade is as sharp as it should be, this is going to pull right away. If you get little fibers that don't cut through, it probably means it's time to change your blade. So we get a perfect straight edge that way. Now, if you're left-handed, you're going to arrange your fabric the opposite way because your holding the ruler down with your right hand and you're using your left hand to cut. So it's the opposite direction. When I have my hand down here, notice that my pointer finger, which is the one when I'm not paying attention, if I get too close to the edge, I've nicked my finger. Make sure it's 1.5 inches back, which is why the 6-inch wide ruler is so nice, because my blade can be here, but my finger's well away from my blade. So in step 1 of this cutting for the quilt, we need 5-inch strips. So remember, I got a straight edge this way, but now I'm going to flip my fabric because I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to line it with the top up here. Oops. Take a minute to nudge it. So the black line that's on my ruler is just skimming the top last fiber of my fabric, and it's just skimming the long edge. And you know, there's that saying, measure twice, cut once. Yeah, some days I'm measuring 3 or 4 times, especially if I'm tired. I don't want to make the wrong cut. So I know I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. That's what I'm supposed to cut. So I'm going to draw back and draw forward and bring my rotary cutter down, and this should pull away nicely. If you are cutting at an angle, you're going to end up slipping off the edge of the ruler. So the more you can keep it perpendicular right up against that ruler as you cut, the better cut you will get. And it does take a little practice to cut with a rotary cutter. So for each of for the 4 small prints that we're going to do, the red, the blue, the green, the yellow, we're going to cut 2 5-inch strips the width of the fabric. So if you are dealing with, I'm going to pull this over here, a fat quarter. So this is my 18 by 21 fat quarter. You could cut, this is the 21-inch side, you can cut single 5-inch strips, 1, 2, or if you are very comfortable with getting a proper fold, you can cut down this way. Once you getting 2 strips at once. Once you have gotten 2 strips of each of your small prints and the blue center square, then we're going to rotate our strip to be horizontal. And now I'm going to take that strip and divide it up into 5-inch squares. Just like before, I can use my 24-inch ruler. Notice I didn't start up here. I find that to be a little cumbersome. I like to be able to find a line that I can line up. So I've got this line of the ruler at whatever that is, the 6-inch mark. I've got 5 inches going across, and I'm lining up down this side. And if my cuts were accurate, I'm going to have a nice line up at the bottom. So I will put the hand down away from the edge, roll back, and roll forward. And if I pull that away, it's a nice clean cut. Retract my blade, and I have 2 lovely yellow squares that are 5 inches each. So you need a total of 9 of each of the small prints. And the background, you need 36 of them because there are 4 in each block. We're making 9 blocks. 9 times 4 is 36. So once we get all our cutting done, we're going to lay the square out and I call it see it, sew it. So, and I'm gonna come around to the ironing station. Maybe it's less blurry. So the way this goes, our blue is in the center. And on each side of the blues, we have our white on white fabric. So this is a fun thing about white on white fabrics. So this fabric is right side up. And there are cute little white daisies right there. And probably tough to see on the camera, but there's dotted line white daisies in the background white. These squares are very easy to mistakenly sew upside down. So I suggest good lighting. I will often go right under a light to go, oh yeah, that's the right side, because I have sewn them in upside down. White on white fabric is lovely because it gives a dimension to that quilt and adds interest, but you got to be real careful about what is the right side. So I'm going to place my 4 squares. And then I'm actually going to double check the square that I made. Are they in the right spot? Because we have to make them all the same in order to make our toss in part 2. Oh, and I did. Look at that. So I've got red and green across from each other, blue and yellow across from each other, and opposites like this. I mean, it's your quilt. You do any order you want, but you want to lay it out. And you could stack them then. I would have 9 reds, 9 whites, 9 greens, 9, 9, 9. So you stack them up like this. Then we can finally think about sewing. If you notice little wrinkles developing, press, and it's gone. So because we want to sew on a wrinkle-free fabric. All right, so to sew, oh, something just happened.
I think you can touch OK at the bottom on the screen if you can.
I tried that. It didn't. Now what happened? The camera. What's going on? I think I have to go to the camera. Okay. There we go. So today we're going to use the Singer Fashion Mate sewing machine. I love this machine. It has 99 stitches that it does. There are down here 9 different buttonholes you can do. And then there's all these decorative stitches that I could see on collars, on cuffs of blouses, running down the button placards. They're a lot of fun. I stitched some of them out just to see what they do. And they stitch out really nice. So this is a nice machine, not just for quilting, but for clothes making. You could decorate your quilts with a lot of these stitches. We're going to use just a simple straight stitch, the 0, 0. This machine comes with a collection of feet. It comes with a buttonhole foot. This is the standard foot that it comes with, which you would use if you were clothes making, if you were doing some clothes repairs. But for quilting, we want to use a foot that will give us an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So if I measure the center to the end, it's a little wider. You probably can't see that very well, but it's wider than a 1/4 inch. So instead, we have, I'm going to take it off for you. We have this 1/4 inch foot that the center hole is where the needle's going to go up and down. This piece right here is a little flange, little metal piece that sticks out. That is where the fabric rests against as it feeds through the machine, and it gives you a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So that's the foot we will use. It's easy to change a foot. There we go. So it's on. All right, so I've got my squares laid out. And what I'm going to do is what's called chain piecing. So remember, if I have 9 reds stacked up here and 9 whites, I can just keep sewing these together and sew all these together and sew all these together. That's the sequence we're going to use. Now, the first time I'm making a quilt of a pattern I haven't done before, or if I want to see how it's going to turn out, I will make one block first completely, like here, to make sure I'm happy with it. And once I determine that I'm happy with it, I like my fabrics, I like the pattern I chose, then I will go to chain piecing. So what chain piecing means is I'm going to take, going back to the sewing machine, I'm going to take my 2 pieces. Remember I said, see it, sew it. So these 2 were next to each other. I flip it, right sides together, double check that my white is, that this is the wrong side of my white. Now, when I first started out sewing, I pinned everything. I don't pin now, but I'm going to pretend like I'm a newer sewer. And I'm just going to put 1 pin in here perpendicular. And actually, yeah. And I'm going to lower my presser foot. And I've got my fabric just shy of where the needle's going to go down. Let's see if I can zoom in a little for you to see that better. Okay. Can we see that better? There's the little metal piece right here, and my fabric is resting against it. Now, I start with my needle down, and you start sewing. I think you know what, I made a rookie mistake. Make sure your bobbin thread is pulled out. And let's get that spare thread out. Let's try that again. Okay. We have some spare threads going on. All right, so I'm feeding, notice I'm not pushing this fabric through. This Fashion Mate Singer machine, it pulls it through. My only job is to help it go straight, doesn't take a lot of work on my part, and to pull that pin out before I get past that little flange that sticks out. So I'm going to pull my pin out and keep going. Now, I'm also not going 100 miles an hour. This machine will go a lot faster, but I prefer the slow and steady approach. It helps me adjust my fabrics. So then I'm going to flip over to where I have my squares here. Remember, we see it, we sew it. I'm going to flip this over and remind myself this is the seam I'm sewing, not this side. So that's the part I pick up. Go back to my sewing machine.
And Becky, can you just zoom out just a little bit?
Of the machine? Sure.
Yeah.
Whoop, wrong way.
Yeah.
How's
there
that?
we go. That's good.
So this is now called chain piecing, right? I've got 1 piece sewn. It's still there. It's past the foot. And now I'm sending in the second one. Speed it up a little. I don't use the reverse button to backtrack to secure the stitches. You don't need to do that when you're chain piecing because those seams are going to get sewn further.
Becky, can you share what stitch length you're using?
This is set at 2.5, which is the standard straight stitch length. You can, when I am piecing quilts that have a lot of much complicated piecing, I will bring it down just a little to 2.0 because you get a few more, it's more stitches in the same distance and gives a more secure seam. But 2.5 is good as well. I wouldn't go longer than that. Then it becomes more like a basting stitch. So we can bring this down to 2. We just, I'll show you on the machine. It's quite easy to adjust. You just use your down arrow here to bring it down. And now I'm at 2. So very easy to adjust. And I feed my piece through. So when I'm done with my chain stitching, I can lift my foot, pull it, cut on, there's a blade on the side over here that cuts my threads. I don't know if, are people aware that their Singer machines have this? It's awfully hard to show, but it's where I cut my pieces apart. So you can chain piece the entire quilt, all these pieces, and I often have a movie I've seen a gazillion times on TV playing while I'm piecing because it's kind of mindless. I know what's happening in the movie. I don't really have to pay attention, and I can pay attention to my fabrics here. All right, I'm going to switch over to the iron because once we get these pieces done, the 2 rows, we have to secure the stitch. So, and we have to press our seams to one side. So this is the stitch. I'm going to flip it over. Maybe you can see it better on the blue. You put the iron down and you press. That kind of sets the seam. It sets the threads into the fibers. And then I'm going to open it up with the wrong side up. In this quilt, if you're a Star Wars fan, you'll get this. You press to the dark side. So you're pressing always away from your background fabric. If you are using fabrics, if you don't have a common background and you're using different color fabrics where my background fabrics are, then what you want to do is keep track. And you'll see in a minute why, because you're going to press one row to the outside, the middle row to the inside, and the bottom row to the outside. So we are not pulling and stretching. We're just gently opening it. And I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to finger press it. And since I just set the stitches with the iron, it's a little warm, so it makes it pretty easy to finger press. Then I put the iron on it and I press just 2-3 seconds. And then I like to flip it over to the other side and press again. And then for the top and the bottom rows, so this is the middle. So my red was on top. I have to set my stitches. Set that seam. And then I'm going to press to the dark side, press to the red, just a gentle finger press, and then bring my iron in and press. I used to use steam all the time. I don't use steam anymore. If I feel a seam needs some help, I will hit it with a spray starch again and just press down. I've gotten away from using steam because the steam actually does start to shrink the fibers of your fabric. So I've stopped using it. Also, I live with well water, and so well water has lots of minerals in it, and it was ruining my irons. So I stopped using steam. My bottom row, same thing. I'm going to set my seam first and then press, press, and press. The first time you sew your square, you really do want to make sure that you've got a good 1/4 inch seam. Use a little 1/4 inch ruler and just test it to make sure. You might have to figure out, you know, people see fabric differently when it's going through the machine, and you may have to adjust your where you put it against that little 1/4 inch flange. So once I have these three, I'm going to then go back and sew on the other 3 pieces. And you'll have 3 rows. And then what we have to do is attach those rows. And we're going to press those differently. So I have 3 rows sewn together already. And I want to show you how they were pressed. So this is my first row, and we are pressed towards the dark side, towards the colored fabrics. My middle row, my blue and white, are pressed inward towards my blue, away from the background. And then my last row is, I have it backwards, there we go. They're pressed outward. The reason for this is, if we flip them over, when I go to sew this row, my red and green row, to my middle blue and white row, I want to nest. It's called nesting the seams. So I want this seam right here to come right up against this seam. And because they're pressed in opposite directions, it's almost like a little ledge that comes up to another ledge, and they sit right against each other. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to lay my blocks out the way the quilt orientation is. I'm going to see it and I'm going to sew it. So, well, we'll go red and green here. So I'm going to flip it. And then I'm going to go over to my sewing machine to show you how to nest. Let's see if you can. My blue seam is going to my right and my red is going to my left. So when I bring those against each other, the seams nest really nicely. I'm going to cut this thread off when I was, so let's see if you can see it. They're nested right against each other. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the blue and the green seams. They're going to nest right against each other. You don't want them overlapping. You want them just touching each other. And then you need to pin. So this is strategic pinning. We don't pin right on the seam. It's too bulky. You pin on each side of the seam. So I put one here, and I'm going to put one on the other side, like that. So I am still nested, and I have 2 pins holding it in place. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my blue and green. I think that's pretty good. So my raw edges are even. And I've secured where those seams are.
And Becky, that looks wonderful. We just want to give you, you got plenty of time if you go a little bit over, but it's about 10 minutes until we end. And we have another great question. Someone said that, the green square may have been, looks like it was maybe sewn a little differently. Do you need to rip that out, or can you correct it without ripping it out?
that, yeah, it looks like my seam is a little wide because I was talking and didn't pay attention. So yes, yes, I would take the time I would pull out my friend Jack the seam ripper, and I would rip the seam out. And I actually had a note here, if time allows, to talk about how to use these. So if I can put that question to the end, I'm going to show you, because there's a purpose for that red ball and this very pointy end. And whoever's watching must be an experienced quilter. They know my seam is off here at the end. It's a little wide. I'm gonna keep it for now because of the time. But yes, I would normally take it out. What we're gonna do is, so I've pinned at the two intersections, and then I put a pin at the beginning and a pin at the end, and I'm gonna sew it just like before, being very careful to keep my 1/4 inch seam straight. And you know, when you make these, everybody's 1/4 inch will be different by a thread or two. The important thing is to be consistent. As long as your seam is the same all the way through the quilt, around a 1/4 inch, but it's going to be okay. It's going to turn out lovely. So we're going to sew this through, and for time, I'm going to pretend like I already did. And once we sew that first one, we're going to come over to the ironing station, and this is what we have. I have it upside down, don't I? There we go. Look at that nice intersection right there. The 2 points come right together, and the 2 points come right together. And that's because we nested the seams. Now, when you come over here with this piece, it's going to look like this. You are going to, again, set the seam by pressing. So notice I didn't do this. I press, and then this time we are going to press our seams open. The reason for that is I want to keep the bulk in here as least bulky as possible. So you can press a seam open, first doing a finger press like this. And then you bring your iron in, you press, and you press. A common tool that a lot of quilters will use is a piece of wood that's been rounded. And it's, you can pick these up. Mine was made in my garage downstairs. I said, hey, honey, can you go make this round, a half round? But they sell them at your local quilt store. And what's cool about these is when you press it open, this stick allows your iron to press on that seam, but it's not pressing on your previously ironed seams, because sometimes it happens where you accidentally press a seam the wrong direction while you're opening your seam. So the round wood is a tool, or you're just careful, because remember, we're not ironing, we're pressing. And if you need to hit it with a little spray starch to keep it there, you do that. And see, so I'll just go back and fix that. And I've pressed my seam open, and I flip it to the other side, and I can press this side. So when I'm all done with that, then you're going to bring your next row in. You're going to nest your seams and sew it to it. So then what you'll have is our block with very nice intersections here. And if I flip to the other side, you can see that we've set the row seams open, And our individual 5-inch blocks are pressed away from the background, away from the background, and then away from the background, which is what allows us to nest those seams.
So
you're going to make
Becky,
9.
there's one other question. I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
someone asked about a charm pack. If you could use a charm pack for this.
Charm packs are awesome. What a charm pack is, it's a collection of fabrics that, either. It's a collection of fabrics that are 5-inch squares. You do have to be careful with charm packs, measure them. Some of them have the pinking sheer zigzag edges, and you need to carefully measure it and see where 5 inches is. Does it include the zigzag, or is it on the inside of the zigzag? So you just measure them. Others are cut straight and they're 5 inches. Charm packs are wonderful. They're coordinated, and they make a really great toss 9 patch quilt. They also sell packs of 10-inch blocks in collections of fabrics. Those you could cut and get 4 out of 1 piece of fabric. Those would make a great toss 9 patch as well. So seam ripper. All right, so there are lots of different seam rippers out there. This is my favorite one. I have about 8 of these. They're all over the house, and yet there are days when I can't find my seam ripper. But I'm going to switch over to this camera to show on a seam ripper. There's a red ball and there's a pointy end. This red ball is actually designed so that once you get started, you can have the whole seam go at once. So what, I have to put my glasses on for this. What you want to do, if I wanted to take out this seam, I'm going to pick a stitch. Now, and if you only want to take out half a seam, that works too. So let's pretend like I just wanted to do that. I'm going to pick 1 stitch, and then I'm going to go in between the 2 fabrics. And this is the mistake people make. They go in with this pointy end first, but this pointy end, if it snags your fabric, it's going to break your fabric. It's going to rip your fabric. So you actually go in with you want the red ball to go in there. So if I can take out a couple of stitches here, and then I'm going to go in between the 2 pieces. This is really hard to do in the air. There we go. And I've got my red ball inside the fabric. My pointy end is over here. And I can just go like this, and my seam is released. Takes a little practice, but once you get it down, you know, you're not picking out all those stitches. You're cutting them. So it's a lot easier to rip out a 2.5 length stitch than it is a 2.0, but still both are very doable. Okay, so you are going to make 9 of the 9 patches here. You have to make 9 of these for February 29th. And what we will do during that session is we will toss those. So I'm going to show you how we're going to cut these and then sew them back together again. And we're going to add borders to the quilt. I will show you how to do mitered borders. And we'll talk a little bit about prepping for the quilting process, which will be part 3. So do we have any other questions, Sani?
No, I think that is it. That was great. You're getting lots of people love what you did. So, Becky, really great. Wonderful to have you with us today. That was so nice. And next week, we're actually going to do a little class that is about stabilizers for embroidery. And that's what I'm going to be doing next week.
Oh, that,
So, very fun.
yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to watching that.
All right. I think that's it. Unless you have something else, Becky.
Uh, nope. I think that's good. Make those 9 blocks. I did want to add, I don't know if I said this at the beginning. If you this quilt is 47 inches by 47 inches. If you want to make it bigger, it's easy. You just make more of these blocks and then you adjust your borders accordingly. So if you think you want to tackle a twin bed or a double bed, it's just more blocks. They end up, it's in the instructions what the finished size is, and you can just do the math to figure out what size you need. And if the 9 blocks is too much for you, make 3 and make a table runner. Just sew something so that you start to practice the skill. If you sew 15 minutes a day, you're going to get bitten by the quilt bug and you're going to want to do more because it's just fun. Thank you for joining me.